Good morning. As you'll note in the bulletin, I'm Doug Tackett, and this is my friend and brother, Dr. Mike Shuknit.
Good morning.
He and I and 4 other physicians, 1 nurse and 1 teacher, traveled to Sierra Leone, West Africa, in late January of this year. I jumped ahead even, but this is a picture of a map of Sierra Leone where we visited, but our journey began actually many years before when one of our mutual friends and colleagues, Dr. Ron Baker, asked Mike and I to be part of a men's prayer group, which meets early Sunday mornings. Can meet in different homes throughout the men's group, anywhere from Mike's barn to my back porch. And so during these meetings we would hear of Dr. Baker's love and the history of Sierra Leone. Dr. Baker grew up there and then returned there as a medical missionary. And then after hearing about this for a number of years, he asked Mike and I and some other folks, as I already described, to go on a mission to Sierra Leone. And Sierra Leone became independent from the United Kingdom in 1963, led by Sir Milton Margai, who became the country's first prime minister. From 1991 to 2002, the Sierra Leonean Civil War was fought and devastated the country. The proxy war left more than 50,000 people dead and much of the country's infrastructure destroyed, and over 2 million Sierra Leoneans displaced as refugees to neighboring countries. More recently, in 2014, the Ebola outbreak overburdened the weak healthcare infrastructure, leading to more deaths from medical neglect than Ebola itself. It created a humanitarian crisis situation and heavily impacted economic growth. The country has an extremely low life expectancy relative to other countries at 57.8 years. Although English is the official language spoken at schools and government administration, the Creole language, an English-based Creole, is the most widely spoken language across Sierra Leone and is spoken by 97% of the country's population. And our dear friend Dr. Baker speaks both languages as well, fluently, which was of great assistance to Mike and I, who, well, sometimes barely speak English. The Creole language unites all the different ethnic groups in the country, and especially their trade and social interaction with one another. As Tracy already mentioned, Sierra Leone is a primarily Muslim country, with the overall population being 78% of the population. Although there is an influential Christian minority in various denominations at about 21%. Sierra Leone is regarded as one of the most religiously tolerant nations in the world. And Sierra Leone has relied on mining, especially diamonds, for its economic base. Also, it's one of the largest producers of titanium, bauxite, and a major producer of gold, and has one of the largest deposits of rutile, which is another mineral that's mined from one of the places actually near where we were in Matru. It also has the 3rd largest natural harbor in the world, but despite exploitation of this natural wealth, 70% of the people live in poverty. One of the interesting points that I learned was that when Mike did a hernia surgery on a youngster, it cost a total of $26 for the whole thing. Now, remind yourself that you brought your own food, you brought your own bed clothing. You weren't your own nurse, but you did have a fine surgeon for $26 for your hernia repair. So when Ron presented the idea of this medical mission to West Africa, I felt led to volunteer, and as did Mike. And Mike's going to tell us a little bit about his call to this mission.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come speak today and share my true blessings from God, to be able to share my talents and my skills with those of us around the world. As St. Patrick went around looking for his way from God, he had to listen, he had to hear, he had to see, and he had to feel. And we ought to do the same thing. We sometimes get so covered up in our daily lives that we forget to hear God speaking to us. And we're not crazy, by the way, if we do that. So my commitment to taking care of people here, both here locally in Berrien County, as well as throughout the state and throughout this country, as I have in the past, as well as abroad, comes from God. And again, I think we have to hear Him talk to us. About 10 years ago, as a native of Berrien County, born and raised in Benton Harbor, grew up in cities like Bridgman, South Haven, and Benton Harbor as well. Couldn't wait to leave, and didn't know what I was leaving, but was chasing something that wasn't truly God's. Spent many years abroad and was very blessed by Him with wealth and fortune and still things that were earthly. But until 10 years ago when He told me to come back home and serve here, I didn't find out what He truly meant. I met guys like Doug Tackett and Tracy and their family. I've met guys like Ron Baker, who from the beginning of my return back home here made God feel present in my heart. So that's what gives us the desire to go help people abroad. This mission in particular was driven by Ron. Ron is a good Christian brother of ours who is always encouraging, always living by example. He's been asking me to go to Matru with him for 10 years since I've been here, since I've known him. We've been going places like Haiti and South America. We've been other places in Africa as well. But Matru was always off limits for us. Ebola came, and we were prohibited to go because of the virus that was there, and government change there, and instability prevented us to go. Finally, this year, everything came together, and God blessed us. We had a great group of people who, after 14, 15 days on the road together, never had one conflict. We all had one purpose and one mission: to go, to help, to teach, and to praise God. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to do these things. I wish we all could do them in our own certain ways, here locally, here abroad, or wherever in this world we go. But give God the praise to give it in our heart to make it happen.
Well, this group set out from Berrien Springs to Detroit, where we were blessed to be able to check 3 bags for international travel. Typically in the U.S. you only get to check 2, but we were able to check 3. And most of these were packed with supplies for people at the hospital in Matru. And we have a skilled delivery man, for instance. Mike helped out with that.
That's how they carry things there, by the way.
Yeah, typically on the top of their head. And we landed in Freetown and traveled by land cruiser to Matru. And in Sierra Leone, there's some paved highways, but most of the roads are just suggestions. And so you have pretty much no choice but to either go in Land Cruisers or Land Rovers or large trucks. On the way to Matru, we were able to stop at the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital in Waterloo and visit with Dr. Scott Gardner and his wife Becky there and their staff. Yes, we did have to pay toll. These bridges are built by the Chinese, interestingly enough. And this is Dr. Gardner's operating room in Waterloo. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody got any pictures of the Ebola tents that are still in place at Waterloo Hospital. And this shows the ferry, ferrying us across the hand-driven ferry. One of my residents decided to be part of the human engine that moved the ferry across to Matru, across the Jong River. And Mike, maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit what your first impressions were when you...
So impressions when you reach a place like Freetown, which is a large metropolitan city of shacks and stacks of people, is, wow, where am I at? It's not Kansas anymore, and we're in a completely unique environment. However, you feel no different if you're going into, say, Haiti or into Nicaragua and their capital cities. They're always large chaos. And you'll see people coming at you for help. They'll come at you from every direction. They'll come in masses. And it's really hard not to extend help, which they think is financial, to them. But you will find out very quickly when you talk with them, they're just trying to survive. And you speak to them in kind, concerned ways, they back off. They leave you alone. But you see the need for hope, and you see hope, but you see mostly desperation. Then you leave the city where it's very desperate in everyone's ways, and you go to the countryside, and you keep thinking, how could it get worse? It gets worse. So can we go away from bad sanitation and bad water supplies to no sanitation and no water supplies? You go from poor health care to no health care. And you end up in the city of Matru, which is a city about 10,000 folks, no infrastructure, no electricity, no power, no water, no refrigeration, nothing. They live the way they lived there for millions of years, probably. But what you do find is loving hearts for one another.
Well, each morning before we would start our clinical duties, we participated in a devotional time with many of the staff of the hospital. This young lady here was one of the pastors at the local church, and we were also then able to interact with the patients. One of my malaria patients here that needed hospitalization, and others throughout the day. This was when we were actually on the road to an outreach at a school, but I'll come to that.
I've been asking Doug to do that to me for a long time. He still won't do it. But you do meet a lot of great folks. And as Doug said earlier, it's about 80% Muslim, 20% Christian. Whether I was working with the patients or the staff or the direct doctors or the theologians that were there, they had pastors of every religion and faith there, you found out one thing in common of them all. They loved and respected one another. I think it's because they don't have media there. They don't have TV, they don't have radio, they don't have print, and they don't get to hear the chaos that divides us. Even though they had completely different faiths, they still had the same divine God, and they respected one another and loved one another. And it was not hard to talk to any one of them and not be judged or not be criticized, because they took you to heart, and they were so grateful and so thankful for everything we did for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, one of the outreaches that we did, besides the medical and surgical, was to a school about, well, as I told Dr. Baker, everything is 10 hours away, but it was really probably more than like a couple hours away, but it felt like 10 hours away. And we were able to work with the students there and some of the staff, checking them out, seeing what we could do to help them out. And then another mission went out to a different town, Gambia, where there was a meeting that they had in the evening after they had clinic, where they showed a film on the life of Jesus. And during that film, they stopped in the middle and had an appeal, and hundreds, literally, of folks raised their hand for God. And that was such a blessing. And here's the area where they were watching the film outside in nice warm temperatures.
We came home to 3 feet of snow, by the way.
Yeah.
It wasn't very nice. It was a great experience for all of us to go there. My highlights were many, and they will not be forgotten ever. But there were several that stuck out. First of all, I always desired to be a rock star, be famous, sing on stage, do something. I couldn't. God didn't give me that talent. But when we walked through the streets of Matru, and we do that every night, we'd walk down to the river to take a cool-off swim in Jung River, and Dr. Baker was oftentimes with us. Oftentimes he wasn't. But as you walk through the streets of Matru, if you were a white man or probably a white female, which was really out of place there, you'd be greeted by, Dr. Baker, Dr. Baker, Dr. Baker. And they'd be from the size of peanuts to the size of the oldest men and women in the village. What they were doing is giving respect and praise to Ron and his father, who started a secondary school there many, many years earlier, for the efforts they had given. They were truly rock stars in their heart, and that really, really moved me. We always think of worldly possessions. That was a real godly, spiritual possession that Ron had given that country, and that town in particular. And it was everywhere he went, or people went, you'd go, they would call you Dr. Baker in terms of respect. The other thing was the people we met, the patients. I had a nurse in the hospital, how dedicated she was. We took some technology which they didn't have there. We took an ultrasound machine, which sounds kind of unusual. We have them everywhere we go here in this country. They don't have them. They don't have x-ray machines. They don't have, like Doug said, the patients that bring their family has to bring their own food. The family has to bring their own bedding. Their family has to give them the care, because there's really not care. But this was a nurse in the hospital who was having some abdominal pain. We scanned her, and she had an ectopic pregnancy. First of all, the fact that we were able to take a machine that could diagnose this before it killed her, in a sense, because it's a hard diagnosis to make even in this real world of healthcare and advanced science. We did that. We diagnosed it by doing an ultrasound. And we can treat those without surgery. We were going to be there for 3 more days by the time she was diagnosed. She was a Muslim. So the day before we were leaving, she shows up to prayers with us. And She has an IV in her hand. I talked to her. I said, somebody having surgery today? And she says, yeah, you're gonna do my surgery today. I don't feel right, and I don't want you leaving Tom so I don't die. I said, wow, well, praise God. Thank him for making this all happen. It's truly how it did happen. We took her to surgery, Dr. Baker and myself. We took her ovary out. It had ruptured. She was bleeding internally. Again, praise God. She went back to the female ward, which is the male ward, which is the ward, and sat in bed for, it couldn't have been a matter of minutes. One of the other ladies that ran the ward came out and said, you need to see your patient. So I came out of the OR. Turnover time was very slow there too. Went to see her, and she's up taking care of patients again. She worked the night before. She came to prayers, learned to become a Christian, I believe, had surgery, got up and started helping people again.
With an IV.
With an IV in her hand. So I said, you know, you have two choices. You can go home and rest, or you can go home and rest. So get out of the hospital. I don't want you to work anymore. We left the next morning at 4 a.m. She was there to greet us and thank us, and just a wonderful person to see. But yeah, the experiences are multiple. Every minute, every day we were there, we were blessed by God's protection. 10 days in the roughest environment of the world that I've ever been in. Not one breakdown of a car, not one fight between individuals. And with a surgeon, that's pretty hard to do. Just truly blessed in our whole experience.
Yeah, really, the thing that I look back on as a whole was the welcoming spirit that the folks there had, their eagerness to learn about God and learn about health, and just the indomitable spirit that God puts in each of us. Wherever we live, whatever situation we're in, He is with us.
The patients always say, thank you, doctor, thank you, doctor. I said, no, don't thank me, thank the dear Lord. He put us here. And we have to go about our days every day like that. And again, we learn so much from them, as I hope we left them to learn a little bit from us as well. Thank you for the opportunity again.